Well, in the SEAL teams, again, you might think the same thing. Well, the biggest, toughest SEAL that can destroy everyone else is going to be the leader that everyone looks to. And it's just not true. And in fact, a lot of times those guys that might be the biggest and the strongest and the fastest, they're actually arrogant as well, because they think they can beat everyone, and no one wants to work for those people. And so it happened when I first started my consulting business, and I would have, a CEO say, "I can't wait till you come in and just whip my people into shape." Mm-hmm. And I'd say, well, you need to find somebody else that's going to whip people into shape, because I don't do that. And they couldn't quite put together that me wasn't into whipping people into shape. And what I wanted to actually do is teach people to lead and to lead people myself. And when you're leading, you're not having to whip people. In fact,
that's an indication that you're not leading.
Exactly. That as a leader, the place where I usually found myself was I'm actually having to pull the reins back on people, because they're going far and away above what I actually would even want and expect them to do. They want to go even more and do more to accomplish the mission. And that's where you want to get. And I find it interesting that, you talk about that all the time, that it's not the person with the biggest club. It's not the person that's the meanest and the most aggressive. Sure, they might rise for a minute. They might get some control, and that happens in any organization. Oh, if you've got a CEO that really, he's just a tyrant and everyone's scared of him, he can make some things happen for a little while. And then all of a sudden someone says, he wants us to do it that way? I'm going to do a little sabotage here.
Right, exactly.
Just a little sabotage. Exactly. Your project that you want us to get done by October 31st, it got delayed, boss. Yep. And you can go nuts and you can yell and scream, but you should have listened to me when I said we needed more time. And now guess where we are? Yep. We didn't deliver the product we're supposed to deliver. So you can yell and scream all you want. It's not going to get that product delivered.
Yeah, well, and if you tyrannize people badly enough, they'll actually hurt themselves to hurt you. So, they're willing to take a hit to reclaim justice, let's say. So yeah, that's really worth knowing. And so one of the things that Jean Piaget pointed out, and because he's a very interesting psychologist, and he's never taught properly, because most of these great thinkers were very strange people, and the strangeness gets edited out of their stories. And it's really too bad, because they're way more interesting when you know how strange they were. And so Piaget was obsessed with the disjunction between religion and science. And his goal as a thinker was to reconcile the two. And so to some degree, he was looking for a biological basis of morality. That might be one way of thinking about it, or at least to reconcile the idea of a biological substrate with an emergent morality. And one of the things he said is, okay, imagine two systems. All right, so both systems are moving towards a goal, any old arbitrary goal. And in one system, the people within it are acting under compulsion. And in the other system, the people within it are acting voluntarily. Said the people who are acting voluntarily will defeat the people acting under compulsion, because in order to use compulsion, you have to spend a fair bit of time and energy on force. And so it makes you inefficient. Whereas if everybody is together on the project, then you don't have to spend any time on compulsion, because people are compelling themselves. And so that's what he called an equilibrated state. So an equilibrated state was, well, we sit down and we have a negotiation. It's a real negotiation, so it has to be honest. And we say, okay, well, what the hell are we doing? And everyone hashes that out, and we decide what we're doing. And then we decide how that would be good for all of us, but each of us singularly as well. So if you got your family put together properly, then the whole family moves together, but everybody inside moves ahead as well. And so then everybody's pushing in the same, you know how it is in a negotiation. You actually want your interests to align with the interests of the other person, because then you don't have to worry about the integrity of the deal. It's like everybody has reasons to keep it thriving. And the idea that capitalism somehow is predicated on the tyranny of the people at the pinnacle, that happens when it gets corrupt. But it doesn't happen at all when it's working properly, because deals that aren't based on mutual self-interest and group interest simultaneously have to be enforced, usually with lawyers, and then you're done, right? You're done at that point.
That's actually incredible. So when I work with companies, I was working with a company, this is a couple of years ago, maybe even 3 or 4 years ago. And, they were talking about how they needed to hold their salespeople accountable. And that's what they needed to do. And they needed more accountability. And the sales leadership underneath them needed to hold all their frontline sales leaders accountable for everything and follow these rules and make these numbers of calls and do these follow-up things and send the follow-up emails. And they needed to get this accountability thing going. And this was when I heard this guy saying this, it was the first time I said, because I'd heard this a lot, this word accountability in leadership. You hear, oh, well, we just need better accountability. And it's a trick because you think about it and you say to yourself, well, if I'm in charge of you guys and I'm going to hold you accountable to make sure you do everything you're supposed to do, well, then we will successfully do what it is you will do because I held you accountable. I made you do it. The problem is, in any organization, there's too many people to hold everyone accountable to everything that they're supposed to be doing. So it just doesn't work. And so you could take one group, and this is what I said. I said, if you've got one group where you have to hold them accountable for each and everything that you do, and you try and do that, versus a group where people know what they're supposed to do and they want to go and do it, I go, which team is going to win? And he said, well, the group that wants to do it themselves. I go, that's what you need to do is get them to want to do it themselves.
Yeah, exactly.
That's leadership.
Exactly.
The exact same thing you just described.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, look, if you get people to track everything they do, it takes them longer to track it than to do it. Plus, they hate it. They hate it because they're not being trusted, and it's the most terrible, dull administrative work. And it just kills people who are actually productive because they're driven crazy by that. It's like, leave me the hell alone so I can do my work, and so, yeah, so there's something that, here's an interesting little fact that I think is really cool. I found this out, this is from the psychological literature. So I've been interested in how to increase people's motivation for a long time, and there's a nice literature on that, and part of it was created by Latham and Locke, Gary Latham and Edwin Locke. And they were looking at goal setting. That's how they described it, as a means to improve business productivity. And so what they imagine that you have two teams and you get them to set goals, say, and one team sets goals for their corporate productivity and another team sets goals for their life. And then you match them head to head over some period of time and see which one comes ahead. And what happens is that the people who set goals for their life beat the people who set goals for the company. And so that's really, and then there's a variety of other literatures that support that kind of hypothesis, but it's very, very worthwhile thinking that through, because what you want, if your company is structured properly, you want people in it who have a life, right? So they're aiming at things that they think are valuable, because they're just not going to be motivated, period, unless they're aiming at things they think are valuable. And then you want their loyalty to the company to be nested inside that. So they have to see that working there, no matter what it is that they're doing, and often jobs are repetitive and dull and difficult and challenging and all of that, or you wouldn't be paid to do them, right? They're not all fun and games. But if you can see that the less intrinsically interesting things that you're required to do are related in some directly intelligible way to goals that you regard as valuable, then that tags those activities with this dopaminergic kick that we were talking about earlier. So you need this hierarchy of values, right? Just like, here's what I'm doing with my life, here's why my job is important to that. Or maybe it isn't, and then you have to quit and go find a new job, but that's fine. But, because you might discover that too. And so we started trying to formalize this when at the same time that I also realized something that I've never recovered from realizing, I think. So I teach students usually, for this class, it was 3rd and 4th year students. And so this is at the University of Toronto. They're pretty smart kids. It's a hard university to get into, and they're pretty disciplined, and they're actually quite conservative, all things considered. And I was teaching them about stories and about the fact that our life is a story with a goal and a purpose and a beginning point. And I was encouraging them to develop their own stories. So I had them write an autobiography, and they really got into that. That was quite amazing. To identify, to break their life into epochs and then to describe the important episodes in each epoch, both positive and negative, and what they might do to reduce the possibility of the negative in the future and to capitalize on the positive, which is the purpose of memory, by the way. And then also to write a plan for the future. And so we formalized that. So the plan is, okay, first of all, you have to get yourself in the right mindset. And the mindset is you're trying to take care of yourself like you would care for someone that you cared for. That's a hard mindset to get into because people like their pets better than they like themselves often. And then you have to have a vision. And so the vision would be, well, okay, 3 to 5 years down the road, if your friendship networks were configured properly, what would that look like? If you were pursuing the career that would be appropriate for you and sustaining for you, what would that look like? How are you going to educate yourself? How are you going to take care of yourself mentally and physically? What do you want for an intimate relationship? And how are you going to handle temptations like alcohol and drug abuse? Because they take people down pretty frequently. So all you have to do is think about, okay, what could that be like if you had what you needed? Not some wild fantasy, but realistic in what you needed. So that's the first part. And then, okay, now write for 20 minutes about what your life could be like 3 to 5 years down the road if all of this came together. And then now do the opposite. So imagine all your weaknesses and all the ways that you can go down the wrong path. And then imagine that gets the upper hand. Then imagine where you are in 3 to 5 years. So then you get a polarity. It's like not this and yes this. So you can run away from the things you don't want. And you can run towards the things you do want. That gets your anxiety behind you instead of in front of you, right? Because maybe you're going to go do something difficult and you're afraid of it. And then you think, well, if I don't do this, I'm going to end up there. It's like, oh, okay, that's so terrible that this little terrible is nothing. So, and then in the next part of the exercise, you turn that into an implementable plan, and you write about why your life would be better and why your family's life would be better and why your community's life would be better. So it's like fully articulated. And we've tested about 10,000 university students with that now in 3 different locales. And we've increased the probability that they'll stay in university by about 30% and raised their grade point average about the same. And it's worked best for men who are doing the least well. So in Holland, those were non-Western ethnic minority men, and they improved their performance enough to actually slightly exceed the Dutch national women who were at the top otherwise over 2 years. Yeah, it was unbelievable. It just blew us away. A psychological intervention to cure what's hypothetically a sociological problem. And so that's a good example of how, and what blew me away when I was first considering this is I had all these students, 21 years old, and I realized that no one had ever sat them down, not even once in their entire career in education, and said, okay, who do you want to be? Like, what sort of person is it that you want to be? Not job, it's like character. What do you want your life to be like? What should it be like? And what shouldn't it be like? And like, write about that seriously, like your life depends on it, because it does. And then I thought, well, that's so weird. Why in the world isn't our education system set up to help people with that? Because it's like, that's kind of obvious, It's like, what are you doing and why? And then I did some reading partly from John Gatto, who's done some interesting work looking at the history of the education system. And it was a derivation of the Prussian education system back in the late 1800s. And it was designed to produce obedient, well, it was partly soldiers, but it was partly workers.
Oh, I was going to say it definitely was soldiers, because that was the transition when they had the transition take place at that time as well, where they moved away from centralized command after they got beat by Napoleon. And they were constantly trying to fight towards that direction where the soldiers would not just be obedient, because they realized that is not what they actually wanted. They finally started to do it at the end of World War I, and if they would have done it earlier, it might have turned the tide of the war. But that was what, that's what World War II, the Blitzkrieg and total decentralized command and elements just going out and making things happen and finding gaps in the defenses and attacking them, as opposed to you're just going to wait until you're told what to do.
Right.
And that was the German way and decentralized command. So
right. Well, competence beats obedience. Right. So you unite people under a goal, and then you let them act autonomously. You got to not sell them the goal. That's not right. What you have to do is you have to go in and talk to them and discover what the goal is of the enterprise and what it is that fires people up. And that really does work. And the idea that capitalism is essentially crooked and it's the people who are pulling the wool over other people's eyes who win. It's like, well, now and then there's a criminal action and the person gets away with it, so to speak, although people get away with a lot less than they think. But most of the time within a functional company, you better have your people on board or they will do exactly what you said they'll do. They'll spend 80% of their time sabotaging the company.
Yeah, and I again, something I learned working with the corporate world, and it was working with a corporate world where I reflected on what I did and was talking to a business leader at some point. And I said, well, your people got to understand why they're doing what they're doing. And so then he, absorbs that and says, okay, that makes sense. And so then he gets up in front of his team and he says, well, the reason why we're doing this is because we want to improve our profitability as a company. And, he sat down and we talked afterwards and he said, did I do a good job? Because now they understand. And I said, oh, no, actually, you missed it. And then I started explaining to them better because I learned that what you have to explain, there has to be a thread of why that goes all the way through the corporate reason. But that why has to come back down to the individual contributor.
Exactly.
So they realize that when we do better as a company, when we're more profitable as a company, we can put more money in marketing and we can produce stuff cheaper because we'll do it on a more mass scale. Then we can lower prices and then we can actually hire more people. And that's going to make you move up in this command here and you're going to make more money. We're going to sell more stuff and you're going to get a bigger bonus. So you doing this, the reason why you're doing it is because then you can achieve those life goals because you want to buy that house and that car and send your kid to school. So there's a big difference. You need to make sure that the people understand why they're doing it, not for the corporate reason, not for the mission reason, but for why it's going to help them. The exact same thing you just said.
Yeah,
of course,
it's also really helpful too if your corporation has, I hate to use the word vision because that's, turned into a buzzword, but, it's often that you're working in a company where worthwhile things are happening, exciting and worthwhile things, and you're trying to, make something better at a lower price, let's say. And so there's the heroism, let's say, of producing a product that's going to have a positive impact on the world. And you need to know how your small actions are tied with that greater goal. And then there's this financial self-interest as well. And the thing is, if you can't tell your workers that story, then either your company is fundamentally corrupt because that isn't the true story. It's like you're actually working so that I can rape and pillage the company over the next 4 years and take all the value out of it and run because, CEOs do that from time to time, yes. Or you don't understand how the company works and you can't tell the story, which means you're basically incompetent. Mm-hmm. So, people are not wired up so that they will work without knowing why, unless you beat them. Yeah. And then if you beat them, you don't be thinking that that's victory.
No.
So
it's a temporary victory.
Mm-hmm. That's also something really good to know about marriage. It's like you can never win an argument with your wife. Like you could if you only lived with her for one day. Right. Right. It's like, I won, see you later. Yeah. It's like, no, she's there the next day. Yeah. And then she's beat.
And she remembers that.
She does remember that. Yeah, maybe even more than you remember it. And it also might be that she was right and you just out-argued her. Mm-hmm. So, and that's something that's really worth knowing too, because sometimes, you'll have an argument with, let's say with your wife, and she's got something to say and it's not very well articulated. The same could be true for you. And so you can just brush it aside. But you don't want to brush it aside because maybe there's something there. And if you don't address it, then it's not like it's going to go away, man. It's going to grow. So maybe you have to help her formulate her argument, which is really annoying, because you want to win. You're having this dispute. It's like, I want to win. It's like, you're not winning that game. You're winning the game. Well, I think about it as the game of games. You want to win the set of games that stretch across time.
The long war.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
You want to win the long war. That little battle is not going to matter. And in fact, I don't. You should not try and be right. If you're right, everybody knows it's fine. But the worst thing you do is rub it in and say I'm right and you're wrong. Yeah.
You do that 100 times, and then you're the winner and she's the loser, and then that's great because now you're married to a loser. I mean, that's if you do that 100,000 times, then your marriage is over, and then there'll be hell to pay. You can be sure of that.